Hi, and welcome to InfoSec Pros. I'm Kayne, Field CISO at Hyperproof, and I'm joined today by Jeff Costlow, Security Architect at Pryon. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thanks for having me. It's a lovely morning, so ready to go. Excited.
Okay, fantastic. And because this is a live stream, if you've got a question for Jeff or a question about Pryon or about Hyperproof, please drop it in the comments on either LinkedIn or YouTube, and we'll take those as we go. So before we got rolling here, Jeff, you were talking about your transition where you used to be a deputy CISO, and I kind of want to pick up from that conversation there. So let's talk about your transition from being a deputy CISO, where you had I think a fairly broad scope of responsibilities would be the way to say
Yeah.
it, to focusing on a more narrow focus as a security architect at a venture-backed company. What's that been like?
It's an interesting transition. I consider myself a real hands-on technologist. I feel like I add some of the value, and this is going to be a theme kind of as we go through. But I add a lot of value by being a full stack security guy. I wrote more code than anything else. I wrote C code for a long time. So I'm kind of a low level guy. I really enjoy some of the bits and bytes. And I do truly believe that in order to have a really good security program, you have to have a full understanding top to bottom. And there are organizational ways to achieve that, right? There's hierarchical organizations. I like being in a small company. I like understanding things from the bottom up. And so I felt like one of the things that I had done was gotten a little bit away from getting my hands dirty.
Hmm.
Containers, Kubernetes, Helm charts, just all sorts of fun cloud things or infrastructure things. And I wanted to get my hands back onto those and just understand those really, really well and kind of build it back up. And I'm also a guy that kind of takes responsibility and moves a bunch of things forward and things like that. So to not starting over, but kind of like moving back a little ways and then moving ahead and pulling things ahead. I really enjoy that. I think I really like building things. And
Hmm.
so starting at a low level and building it up is just really interesting to me. I'm not currently doing like DevSecOps, but I want to fundamentally understand it, right? And so these are some of the things that I've been enjoying as I play with. I'm going to go back to writing some Docker files here in a few minutes, and there's an art all by itself to that. And so I like dabbling and getting my hands on things.
Oh, okay, that's fantastic. And just for our viewers, if you want to learn more about DevSecOps, we just had my friend Dustin on in our last episode, where he really talked about how that CI/CD DevOps attitude changed his view on how to do cybersecurity. Jeff, based on your experience from having been deputy CISO, moving to not back, but moving to a more technical role, have you seen any changes in how you're thinking about the problem space?
Well, one of the other areas, not only doing full stack stuff, but I really like, and again, being in a small company, I really like innovation and being a builder, innovating, and um, there's a myth around about there. I don't know if it's a myth is maybe the right word, but the notion of a 10x developer, who enables other developers to be more productive and spool
Okay.
these things out. I
Hmm.
kind of tend to think of myself as being at least a 1x security guy and not the security guy that slows down that innovation. I'd like to think I'm a 10x security guy, but that's probably I don't know how well you can make that work. But at least a 1x security guy that we can keep things moving ahead. We can just do a lot of things securely while at the same time advancing the state of the art and fostering that innovation that really is really important. There's a ton of block and tackle on this sort of stuff when you
Oh, yeah.
get down to it. Like I love holding design reviews. I love thinking about, oh, well, how are we going to design this? Security by design is important, right? People say that all the time. How do you effectuate that within the organization to build out secure features and know what you're doing and do that holistically? It's going to be kind of my theme for this whole talk is how do you do holistic developer work? Um, I also think it works best when you have somebody that deeply understands the problems. And I find that when I know and I can help out the developers and I say, oh, here's a Docker file change that makes it run a simple Docker file change that makes it run as a non-privileged user. table stakes, and we can do that. But understanding that and knowing when to do that is super important. Another one is relationship building. I feel like it's super important for security to be involved in the day-to-day operations of the developers. We can go into DevSecOps if we. I think we should probably just bounce off that because I'm not an expert necessarily there,
Okay.
but I do like to watch it happen and be involved in it and think about it. So I think that's important. I also, from a relationship building perspective, if security is always a department that says no, it gets worked around, and so that's important to me to be involved where those relationships lie.
Now, I want to
Yeah,
go back to something that I want to try to tie a couple threads together there, because you said security is often perceived as the department of no, that sometimes is a 0x, I think, or perhaps a negative X, in using your parlance. And you talked about innovation, and I know that there's a mass drive on the part of developers for productivity and to create innovative features and to get those shipped and out the door. And sometimes security takes a backseat to that. Um, you're in an architect role now, where I imagine you're leading code reviews, design reviews, threat modeling, that sort of thing. How, for people who are in similar roles, what are your guidelines for prioritizing security concerns when you're looking at, like, hey, we've got something innovative, but it has some security potential issues?
yeah.
How do you balance those two?
This is at the surface level. This is a really tough one. How do you do that? My main thing, and you just keep repeating this mantra, right? Security is a feature. Security is a feature. Security is a feature. The natural inclination for most companies is to say, well, but we need to build feature X and feature Y and feature Z, and we only have these few developers, and we can't do everything, and it's all around the features. But my argument is, if you're not scheduling in that feature work, you're going to fall behind. You're going to fall way behind on your security patching and your update, and you're going to be behind. And then sooner or later, something's going to come along, possibly your compliance program, possibly wherever it happens, something's going to come along, and you're going to be behind, and you're going to have to catch up on that. Developers often call this tech debt, right? We know that we create tech debt as we move things ahead because, we really want to make this change over here, but it's a long-lived change, and security can't be that way. Security is not it's not an optional thing. It's a feature just like everything else. And so I mentioned relationship building earlier. It's very important to build a relationship with the product managers, with the people who are setting the agenda for what features are going to be delivered, and build those in at the same time. It's very much again, I keep coming back to block and tackle. We have to keep doing all these things, or we fall behind, and then one breach is all it takes, and that's bad. And I don't like to sell security through fear, which I think is another way to approach this. Of, well, if we don't do this, then we do have some issues and some problems, and to take that. And I feel like my risk management skills are another thing that I bring to the table, and helping people understand. We don't do this. These are the risks that we take. And we're putting something on the backlog. We're building tech debt. We need to eventually do that, and it will stop us at some point in time. And so let's iterate on that rather than be stopped and then try to take a giant leap forward. Because every time I've tried that in my career, it means a whole lot of work, and then you just fall behind again unless you have discipline to keep up to date.
Okay, so I kind of get your point there about security being a feature. I've not heard it so succinctly. I do agree with you that selling security through FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt, is, I hope that that's out of fashion with smart people at this point, because that's not a good look. And to me, ultimately, security is a profit center if done well. But I want to go back to something else. I was looking at my call notes from before today's show, and you said something else very succinct. You said that security is inward facing, compliance is outward facing. And I hadn't heard that phrase before. So can you tell our audience more about that philosophy and how it really influences your approach to implementing security controls, but also making sure you can achieve compliance measures?
Yeah, this one came as a result of a lot of hard earned thought about the processes that I was building as I drove through. It happened to be during some SOC 2 oriented work, not Security Operations Center, but the SOC 2 certification or compliance effort. Um, and I have some stories around this, but one of my stories was, I'll start with the story and then I'll get to it. I had a SOC 2 auditor. I think it was the second or maybe the third year, and
Mhm.
our iteration had been, "Are you doing X? Yes, we're doing X. Are you doing Y? Yes, we're doing Y." And just sort of going down the checklist and checking all the boxes, and that was good, right? That these things are the things we should be doing. And then, as I recall, I'm going to fuzz up some of the details here, but as I recall, he said we brought up an IAM console, and he was like, "Oh, see that access analyzer button there? Push that." And I pushed that button. I was like, "Hey, this is something that I didn't know at
Mhm.
the time, right?" And so that was an area where compliance moved me ahead, but that didn't happen very often. And that's when I decided that I drive security from a security perspective. I want to drive the security features ahead, and I want the compliance to show people that I'm doing the right thing. There's something of an asymmetry here that I could have the best security program in the world. I could be doing everything right, just beautifully well done and everything. Uh, but no compliance to speak of. That's
Mhm.
hard from a market perspective. It's just not really going to fly. So I have to have both of them. Um, and but I also feel like compliance is a little behind the times. So I'll give an example, and I hope I don't make too many people mad here. But some of the CM stuff that comes out of the NIST cybersecurity framework is configuration management.
Mhm.
It's clear that it was written in the 90s, maybe the early 2000s. It's clear that it doesn't say anything about Kubernetes or Helm charts or all these, or infrastructure as code. That's probably actually the biggest one. Infrastructure as code and ways to store all this stuff. It has the notion, but it doesn't have the same thing. So there's an impedance mismatch there.
Mhm.
And I really wanted to say, I found myself in a lot of cases working within the compliance framework, but also fostering the innovation that the developers want and need, and translating those two back and forth. And that's when I developed, and to put it concisely, I'll say it again, or I'll say it because I haven't really said it, that I truly feel that security is inward facing. That's the stuff that I do day to day, the block and tackle, the really important design reviews, all those things that we talk about, DevSecOps, all these things that we talk about. And then my compliance program is outward facing. That's what I use to prove to everyone that I've done this. And I like that notion, because that means that I can say we're doing this for a security reason. We're not doing it for a compliance reason. Because if you're doing things purely for compliance reasons, yes, we need to do things for compliance reasons, and generally those align really well with security. There are
Mhm.
some impedance mismatches, and so that's where that came from. Um, I
I think you
also,
you make a
yeah.
really good point there about you. We should be doing things not just security for the sake of security, but security for the sake of the business. At the end of the day, the reason we're doing cybersecurity is to make sure that our businesses can retain and will earn and maintain trust with whoever we need to be trusted with, whether it's the rest of our supply chain, whether it's with our customers, whether it's with our suppliers, whether it's with the governmental regulator or market regulator, depending on industry. I'd say trust is ultimately the theme that comes through. But I want to ask, just going to your point then about compliance, we're seeing a push for more compliance across all markets, and I think across all major geographical regions. I can't say what compliance is like in North Korea or in Russia, for example, these days, but I think in most of the, well, let's say Western nations, right? We're seeing this trend of more regulation and more compliance requirements that are often being forced on organizations. And that's as a result of either real or perceived market failures, yeah, to be able to effectively self regulate. What do you think that means for the future of cybersecurity as being something that we just do that's inward facing, given the level of disclosure it seems that the SEC is really looking for?
Yeah, I've been following closely some of the work you've been doing on some of the SEC forms, and I think that's very interesting. And yes, I do. I we'll talk about it a little bit later, I hope. But I want to talk about a pendulum swing. But to answer the question, I I don't. we need to work with both of these.
Hmm.
Compliance, I love it when I see compliance move things ahead. Like that story about, hey, I didn't know about that particular feature. This is great. This solves a couple of my problems. I'll integrate that in and I will use that tool. Generally speaking, it works the other way around. I find my tools, I work my tools, push security ahead, and then my tools help me to tick all the compliance boxes. Again, I'm kind of like papering over a lot of things there because there's certainly a lot of things with
There's certainly a
compliance.
lot of things that happen there in the background. Yes.
Certainly a lot of things that happen there, and I don't want to say that we shouldn't have any compliance. And as a matter of fact, what you say is correct. There's going to be a whole lot more. The CSRB report that came out from Microsoft a while ago has some really good stuff in it,
Oh yeah,
and
I
some of
know I
those
want to
things.
talk to you about that one later.
Right, we're gonna. I've got some. Yeah, we've got some more on that definitely. But I do believe that that sort of thing. If your compliance program were static, if you never used it, if you were living from CSF 1.0, I don't actually. There are two. If you were living with the CSF from 10 years ago, and that's your compliance program, it's not doing you any favors, right? So we have to move this ahead. We have to move it forward as we innovate. And I have noticed that these things lag behind. And again, that sort of impedance mismatch is where I feel I can add a whole bunch and drag that, and not drag it ahead. That doesn't give the wrong impression, but move that compliance ahead and update it. An example is, I still run into places where I have to change my password every 90 days. And that was something that NIST, I used to.
863B.
Thank you. Yeah, I used to be
I
able
have
to
directed
recite all
so
that.
many people, like, please go read this now. And can we have pass keys yet, or at least hardware keys, because passwords are dumb.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed. We've moved on with the technology so far, and whenever somebody is 90-day password policy, I just please hook up my SSO up. Please hook up that, and then let's adjust the settings there. And that's another. Actually, it's a kind of a good theme is the the notion that I kind of lost my train of thought on that one. The notion that what we want to do is move the technology forward.
Hmm.
Sometimes for the compliance password policy, right? This is a beautiful way to do it. If I have a password policy and I'm running around with a bunch of different, it's really hard for me to enforce all those password policies across different identity stores. Now I should only have one identity store. That was hard a few years ago. Today,
Right.
it's much easier, and I can enforce all those things at one point, at one control point in my SSO provider, and that just makes me so happy when I can have that in one spot and tick that little box very easily.
Well, let me ask a question, maybe from a different perspective, because both you and I have been doing this for a few minutes. I've been doing this for nearly 30 years, and I think you've been doing it for a comparable level of time. I think back to the old days. Just your password policy thing is what made me think of it. Um, 20, 30 years ago, we would tell the business, hey, it would be great if we could have a password policy and apply it across all of our computer estates so people can't just wander into the lobby and log into a terminal and edit their own information, right? Or that they couldn't access inappropriate information online that they shouldn't have access to. And often the business would go, yeah, well, no, it creates friction, it creates problems, it's too difficult for our staff, reason, etc. Followed by a series of high profile breaches across multiple industries that are now causing lawmakers in multiple states to say have safe harbor laws to say, look, if you're using any reasonable cybersecurity framework, don't care which one, just please, people have solved this before. Or regulators like the SEC or the FTC saying, look, here's how you have to do things. My question becomes, is that on us? Like, did we fail as cybersecurity professionals in the past couple decades in effectively communicating this value of security, as you say, as a feature to business, so that we wouldn't have had these? Because what I see is we keep, like, every time there's another breach, you can see somebody at CISA is going, I want this to get fixed faster. Or somebody in the EU says, I want this to fix this, and we're going to put on another regulation, which I think is stifling innovation in some spaces. What do you think?
So the first thing that comes to mind is a story. I'm sort of a story to explain things, and I worked at a Kerberos, the authentication protocol. So I
I
worked in an
remember that.
authentication company,
Yep,
From
yep.
1997 to 1999, that was kind of one of my introductory things. It was before Kerberos was integrated into Windows 2000 and before Active Directory or
Hmm.
2001 or whatever it was. Super great protocol, little bit of a protocol nerd. I'll out myself right now in protocols and interesting things like that.
I worked at a company that put Unix Kerberos into Active Directory for integration across compute estates. So yeah,
Yes.
you and I can
Yeah.
nerd out on this, and we're going to lose the audience, but I get
Yeah.
your vibe.
Yeah. Really cool stuff. Really cool stuff. And would love to talk about it some more. At the time, in that 1997-99 era, SSO was our holy grail. We were reaching for that holy grail. Maybe holy grail is kind of, that's the thing you never quite achieve. But I
I think
do
there's a
feel
bunny
like,
that also comes at you at some point when you're on that
right,
quest.
yes, yes, with the holy hand grenade and things like. So the I feel like we have moved so far ahead, and if you read that, we'll get to the CSRB in a minute. But when you read the CSRB report, I love it that they're pushing it and they're saying, oh, not only do we need to have SSO, but we need to have these pass keys. And there was some specific technology mentioned in that I don't think is necessarily worth going into, but they're evolutions of pass keys that do things even better for time and space segmentation and a few other things that are really interesting and good stuff to talk about. However, it's been 25 years since I said we have a holy grail of SSO, and we're still reaching for it. We still want a bunch of these features, and this is, to me, there's just a lot of uh, a lot of moving ahead that happens,
Mhm.
and sometimes the market apparently wasn't ready for a full SSO solution back then. The web was brand new. There were lots of problems. I remember one of the most interesting projects I worked on there was attempting to shoehorn Kerberos into a web browser, which didn't even close to have it at the same time at the time. So
Mm.
I love it. Then this is one of the things that I thrive on as a technologist, and is like, how can we do this stuff? What are the enabling technologies that move it ahead? And frankly, I love it that we can get SSO where we have it. Is it where I want it to be? No, but it's so much better, and I love seeing things like that move ahead. Similarly, some of the frameworks, we talked a little bit about security and in operations. I watch the frameworks move ahead,
Hmm. But the other
and
thing I think that's happened just over the course of that time, though, um, you were applying Kerberos to individual systems. You were applying passwords to individual systems. We were auditing individual systems. And when I mean systems, I don't mean like the Sarbanes-Oxley definition of system of a whole bunch of stuff that does a thing, but rather like in these days, this would be a system under that 1990s definition. Stuff's got way more complicated. Right. We used to have individual, you probably went through that era of let's put a pizza box in racks for every single thing. And we'd had these dedicated one use servers and we had these big sprawling data centers. And now we've pivoted to virtualization through there into many, many containers, like you were saying, around doing Kubernetes, for example. How does that actually affect the scalability and the ongoing management of cybersecurity controls?
so, interesting question. So I really truly I like the Kubernetes and the and what you talked about. The thing that Kubernetes brings to this, and I don't want to get too technology specific here,
Okay,
but
containers in general. I
yeah,
just picked that
containers
one
in
out.
general, just like, so in your example, you had this rigid flexibility of, okay, I'm going to rack and stack this single purpose machine, pizza box, Sun Pizza Box, or whatever it was, and that goes in here, and that's going to do this one job, and it's going to do it forever until we decide. Um, what that tended to lead to is, it tended to lead to kind of brittle systems where, okay, I can't change this, but I have to move this over here, and now, and then building yourself in your head, building yourself a dependency chart of, this thing depends on this, depends on that. I don't know how many times I've read stories about, oh, we lost power in a specific rack, and it turns out that this little thing that was running at the bottom of the rack, or maybe under the IT leader's desk, right, however you want to call that, all of a
You were
sudden is like,
describing my experience in telecom of like you want to patch something from security
right,
and the vendor says if you patch this you will invalidate your warranty of everything in that system and you go,
yeah.
huh, I could take down the entire North American phone system if I apply a security patch. That doesn't seem brittle at all.
So that's exactly, and that's one of the problems that some of the, well, as a architect having loosely coupled systems that come together and talk to each other and accomplish a single purpose, and then we weave those things together. I like seeing that, and I really like some of the Kubernetes and Helm charts to tie all these things together. And so those frameworks have definitely moved ahead. And one of the things that I've noticed, or again over my career, was security moves ahead as the frameworks move ahead. So, for example, we all remember LAMP stacks from the early 2000s, where we had Perl, and then we had PHP, and then we had Ruby on Rails, and every single one of those slightly escalated the security function. I'm sorry, the security things you didn't have to worry about. I don't know if I have a good word for that, but it moved the state of the art ahead. And I really like this Kubernetes loosely coupled, a whole bunch of services running. To your point, though, this is where you exactly wanted to get to. That complexity, I often say complexity is the enemy of security. If you don't understand where a bunch of these nooks and crannies are, if you don't understand that the customer database was going through, and this is just example, the customer database, it needs to be over there for the contractor. Well, how are we going to do that? Oh, sure. Let's just open up an S3 bucket, right?
Mm-hmm.
Speaking 10 years ago.
Yeah. Let's just open up
how many times did we read about
all
that?
the data into there, right?
Yeah. And the
absolutely.
Security department didn't understand the complexities of that. Didn't understand that, okay, we onboarded a contractor and they need X information. And somebody somewhere said, well, if they need information, then I'll just shove it in an S3 bucket and hand it off to them. Flippant decision, but major security implications. Those complexities are again, security failures. Complexity is the enemy of security. Bringing those things together and figuring out, the good news is I do think that there are, with some of the moving ahead of Helm charts and some of these interesting things that draw out essentially graphs, a little less complicated than that, drawing out graphs and laying things out. Infrastructure as code is, again, lintable, in that you used to have a linter that would go through and tell you where there were things that were wrong. Where I want to get to, and I don't think we're there yet, but where I want to get to is a policy enforcer for my Kubernetes and my Helm charts, and to say, okay, it turns out that we're running this particular container a little bit more permiss than it needs to be because it's just this thing over here. That's pretty easily discoverable by a linter. I'll keep using the term linting, even though I think it's a little more complicated than that. And now tie that together with my policy, which says thou shalt not have over-permissed containers or over-permissed other things. And I want all this to be drawn together so that I can write some policy and say, here it is, and then watch it happen in there. We'll get there. I haven't found exactly that tool yet, but I do have high hopes.
In lieu of that type of tool, though, are there any strategies you can offer to the audience that are really something effective for maintaining? Because you've talked about through a lot of complexity, and you've said, hey, it sounds like if there's anybody listening who's got a friend who's in VC, there's an opportunity to create a linting tool for IA infrastructure as code. But what are the strategies you'd say really work, just one or two, for actually maintaining security at scale?
Well, I'll go back to my old standbys. I mentioned relationship building earlier. I have found that I can build myself security champions in areas, and so the developers will look at something and say, "Oh, we had a threat model once, and as we ran, or better yet, as we ran through the tabletop exercise, we noticed that we can't have this particular thing in this particular way, and this is something that I can fix right here and now. Let's alert security." I know full well that doesn't scale quite to where I want it to, but that sort of, let's build this up. Let's figure out how we can build some security champions, escalate the security consciousness of all the developers. I've seen that happen over and over again in my career as well, where I'll explain to somebody what a cross-site request forgery is. And 3 months later, they're coming back to my desk and they're like, hey, check this out. I actually solved a cross-site request forgery. This was years ago, right? I solved a cross-site request forgery because I knew what it was and you helped me. And that sort of thing just like warms my heart. I really feel like that is a way to achieve it. Is
Hmm.
it scalable? No. Is it effective? Does it make me pleased? Yes. This is where I get to the policy decision and enforcing some of these policies and moving them ahead, and that's where I'm at in my journey towards this. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I want to move away from security complexity and containers and go back to something we both wanted to talk about, which was the recent CSRB, the Cybersecurity Review Board, which recently released their review of the 2023 Microsoft Exchange Online intrusion. And I think you've read that. I know I've read that. So after you read that report on the Microsoft breach, what do you really think about the effectiveness of the CSRB's mission? And any thoughts, any guidance for their selection process on which breaches they should be investigating?
So yeah. So first of all, I think let's back up just a little bit. I don't know exactly how this was incepted or where the idea came from, but the idea is a lot of security. I'll just say luminaries, people who have done this before, to look into high profile breaches and then make recommendations. Simple
I think it was
concept.
Solarium that came up with it. I think it was Cyber Solarium that came up with it, which was a
Yeah,
congressional panel that was put together.
yeah, yeah. The Solarium. Yes, that was about 2 years ago that report came out. Correct. Thank you for reminding me of where that came from. That's great. Yeah. Um, and I really like the way they set up the CSRB. They said, hey, if you have an economic stake, because a lot of the security luminaries do work for a company, then they're recused and they can step aside. But as I read, and let's sort of back up, as I read that report, especially the last about 10 pages, I think it's page 17 to 27. I think it's
Ah,
27 pages.
the savage and spicy pages. Yes.
Yeah, well, the recommendations, and as I read through those, I kind of had a laundry list of, yeah, these are things we've been talking about for a really long time. They need to be enshrined somewhere. Actually, let me back up a little bit. So I don't remember. Actually, did I look it up? When was the Equifax breach? Was that with the congressional report? I think that was
Hold up, hold up,
2018.
hold up. I have a prop I keep on my desk. So I got a check from them in 2023, as a matter of fact, where my personal data were worth $12.33 for a
I,
breach that happened between 2019 and 2020. They've actually emailed me to ask why I haven't cashed the check, and it's because to me it's comedy gold.
yes, that is a great prop. I really like that. I'm talking about the one that was even earlier. I think there was a 2018 congressional report where the House released a report on Equifax, and when I read that report, I remember alternating between. I'm going to get myself in trouble here, but like Keystone cops running around. Like there was a lot in that report that was, hey, this happened and nobody paid any attention to it,
Mhm.
and Benny Hill music is playing and things like that. On the other hand, as I read through it, it was like, okay, that's an understandable mistake, right? This team is overworked, and you can get that sense from reading it. This team is overworked. This team is doing all these things correctly, but then they didn't. And as I recall, this was also a patch system in the air conditioning. No, it wasn't the air conditioning. That was a
That was
Target.
Target.
I've forgotten the details on this, but you can draw that line and you can say, all right, sure, they had the right notion. They had all these great ideas. They had a hard time executing. To be fair, we have come a really long ways. To compare the Equifax of 2016, 2017, whenever that actually happened, with the
Mhm.
Microsoft of today would be completely unfair, because they really have moved the state of the art ahead. I had some of the same reactions though, right? I had some of the same reactions of, okay, this was clearly a mistake. This was not happen. This is the signs of an overworked team and they're busy trying to do too many things. And then some of it is just kind of like there, but for the grace go I, right? These
Mhm.
are some of the things that I could see happening in some of the programs and some of the areas that I've been in. And so
But I don't want to
what
be
I
too fair
really
to them here, right? I mean, they got wrecked. They're not sure how they got wrecked. I mean, it turns out their thing about the credentials going out through some dump to some other system across the security boundary was just rampant speculation. right? And the CSRB report was not, they didn't spare them. They highlighted a series of security failures at Microsoft, as well as those suggestions that you were mentioning for cloud security providers in those last pages of the report. So what do you think other organizations can learn from those findings that would actually, like, instead of pounding on Microsoft, which not hard these days, it turns out, but what can
Yeah.
other organizations learn to improve their cybersecurity posture, whether or not they're a cloud security provider?
So there's some real gems in those recommendations. I was going to point out, and I mentioned this earlier, some of the SSO technologies that they want to use that are coming up, passkeys and time and space segmentation. That was another one that, yes, okay, they lost the key. They still don't understand how exactly they lost that key, but
Mhm.
that key was an overpermissed key, and let's not lose sight of what that means. An overpermissed key that has broad implications,
Mhm.
and you leak it. Oh no, we've just leaked all this thing. We understand the concept of no, your keys should not time and space segmentation of keys. No, your keys shouldn't last forever, and no, they shouldn't. You shouldn't have one of them for every single thing. You should have domain specific keys, and you should rotate them every so often. And that was one of the flaws that they hit Microsoft pretty hard on. I can't count the number of recommendations, but that was one of them. And again, that sort of thing and building new keys, it's block and tackle work. It's we have to do this. We have to decide where all our key domains live and how we can put these things together and move them forward. And I, so your question was originally, how can
What
we,
do we all learn from this? So
what
I'm
do we
hearing
all
we
learn
should do
from
key
this?
management a lot better, which I think is, I would hope would not be a big, apparently it is a hard one for people to get, but admittedly, cryptography is non-trivial. Anything else?
Well, cryptography is non-trivial. Key management is the hard part, right? We understand and we roughly know how to do the right crypto primitives in the right places. That's not settled in every circumstance, and there's crazy things out there like homomorphic encryption. I'm
Mhm.
also, in addition to a protocol nerd, I'm a crypto nerd as well. Um, so we mostly understand how to do those things. You don't need a full-time cryptographer on staff for most companies. Microsoft certainly should have them. Google has them, and that's correct.
Mhm.
For most things we don't need, we want to have these things, but that block and tackle of, okay, where's this key, how are we rotating it, where what are we doing with it, and that goes everything from identity keys for our users. This leads to the password discussion that we kind of already had. Those are keys as well. We have to rotate those, we have to pay attention to those. And so my, I guess, bringing back, my recommendation is to read through those recommendations, those last 10 pages, and
Okay.
which of those apply to my program. I've thought about that, and there's some work to be done, and keep moving those things ahead. And every company I've ever been in, there's a lot of good recommendations, and we move these things ahead, and that's what we have to do.
Okay. All right. So, and those recommendations came out of the CSRB's analysis. And earlier this week, I even put it up on LinkedIn. There was an amicus curiae brief in favor of the dismissal of the SEC versus SolarWinds and Tim Brown case, where the amicus curiae, friends of the court, basically said, you know, you're kind of making stuff up here, SEC, and you're trying to over rotate on what was not in a regulated statement, like a security statement that appeared on a website. But what I come back to is Tim Brown and SolarWinds were very forthcoming with CSRB. Like they went for transparency. They're like, you know what, Russia came in here and we got wrecked. Let's figure this out together. Let's do this as a partnership. And then the SEC turned around and said, yeah, let's do a civil lawsuit here too, because that's not a great feel. So thinking forward now, the CSRB rolls up on your door. And we've seen they've got some pretty harsh vibes. Like, you've had a breach, you're already having a pretty bad day. CSRB comes up and says, "Hey, let's have a chat," right? And they are unsparing in their treatment of folks. Do you think that companies moving forward, in light of the SolarWinds thing, the Microsoft thing, do you think that companies are going to actually be willing to be transparent with the CSRB investigators? Or do you think that they're going to need subpoena power? Because right now it is voluntary prep. participation.
It
They do
is.
not have a subpoena power. Do you think that's going to change?
So I no, I do not think that I do not think that will change. One of the things that I've looked into in as I've gone on my journey is that I believe that a CISO should establish a good relationship with the legal department,
Hmm.
and from a risk management perspective, if SolarWinds or Microsoft had closed those doors, I think it would have been a worse report. I really do. I think they would have come in and they would have said, here's what we didn't learn, and it would have been more savage. It's as I read the report, the Microsoft report that I have over here, it was not a simple thing, and there were some people who ahead of time were saying, maybe they'll let the CSRB will let Microsoft off light. They didn't, but this report is constructively constructed in that the recommendations are really good recommendations. It's a readable report. It's 27 page. You could sit down and read it. I've read it a couple times now.
Hmm.
Uh, it is digestible and there's good advice in it. Uh, I think I think that if Microsoft or anybody had said no, we're not, that the risk would have been greater and they would have gotten a much worse marks for it. The way it is, Microsoft is they have a good marketing department. They will eventually turn this around and they'll say, hey, we read this report and these are the things we've done. At least I would actually like to see that. I would like to see some sort of at a Microsoft conference or Black Hat or something a year from now. Have somebody from Microsoft Azure stand up and say, hey, these are the things we did. And these are the things that we did. By the way, that advances the state of the art for everybody else. We can all see what is being done behind the scenes. One of Side note, one I attended reInvent. I think it was the first year of reInvent about 4 or 5 years
I remember
ago.
that one. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I believe it was in Boston, if I recall correctly. And one of my favorite talks there was the guy who stood up, and he was at least the head of the KMS, the KMS overall effort.
Hmm.
And he had some really cogent things to say about, hey, here's how we're doing all these keys, and here's how we've thought about all these. And it was confidence inspiring, is the best way to say it. Again, this was might have even been
Pre-pandemic, so
6 years
possibly
ago.
more. Yeah, I think. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it was a while
Do you think
ago,
they
but
needed? You're saying they need to come back with a recommendation and say, listen, we looked at what the CSRB had to say. We participated fully, and here's what we've learned, and here's what we're doing differently.
I think transparency is an asset in this one, or a positive attribute that both engenders my feelings of security.
Hmm.
Think back to the last breach. I won't name any names, but like some of the breaches where you read where you can see that they're deliberately either avoiding or trying to stay away from saying some of the details.
The
I
ones that
feel
smell like
worse
white
about.
Italian shoe leather, perhaps, where the attorneys just got it and they ran with it a little too far. Yeah.
Yes, those sorts of things cause me more anxiety than reading this. If somebody were to ask me, "Hey, can we use Azure? Is Azure a secure development platform?" I would say, "Well, we have a report here, and it says that they have work to do, but do I have some confidence that they will actually achieve it? Yes." When you read a report that savages somebody and says we never got any information from them whatsoever, so we have no idea that they're doing anything, that makes me go, I'm not sure I
That's
want to
not
use that.
confidence inspiring.
That is not
That's
confidence
fair.
inspiring.
All right, I want to go as we kind of move towards the top of the end of the show. I want to ask about one other regulatory recent development. It was much longer than Microsoft's report. I think it's only 400-ish brief pages, and CISA came out with new draft reporting requirements. And they're in the Federal Register. Like I say, they're open for public comment right now. I believe there are, somebody did analysis, about 310,000 businesses in the United States that would be affected by this new requirement to report within 72 hours if you've had a breach. Um, my question becomes, thinking of how, like, you and I have both gone through breaches, we know what that rodeo looks like. What how are organizations supposed to balance that very timely disclosure, and especially small businesses, to meet the requirement, but also balance that against the potential for incomplete or incorrect information during the initial phases of incident response?
So first of all, there's a huge difference, and you alluded to it a little bit, between the 27-page concise with recommendations CSRB report and this 400 odd page, and honestly, one of them was kind of under my pillow, and I'm reading it. Not totally true, but I'm reading it and I'm like perusing through it and curling up by the fire with a good CSRB report, and the other one is something that is just a slog and not easy to make my way through. So two different things. I just having said that, I think that's important to say. As a CISO, in an emergency situation, I talk a lot about a cone of uncertainty. Oh no, something bad happened. We're going to have to do something. And we always practice this from a GDPR perspective, which was 48 hours. And I think that was, 48 hours.
Yeah.
That was good training for this sort of thing, which is 72. It's roughly the same thing. It doesn't matter that much. So my job as a CISO is to take that cone of uncertainty and squash that down to enough certainty that I can say something as soon as possible. So what are my strategies for that? Knowing full well that this is something I have to do for GDPR, for this thing. Sorry, I'm blanking on the name. And then also knowing that I have to do this for customer contracts as well. So in my tabletop exercises and what I've practiced in previous areas, it's always been okay. After a certain amount of time, after our 32 hours have elapsed or whatever it is, and we know we've got a report due in another 16 hours for GDPR or whatever it is, transparency is again one of the things that I'm gonna say about this. And I wanted to work with legal. I mentioned earlier that legal is one of my best friends as a CISO. It's risk management. We bring it together. Risk, a lot of legal is risk reduction, risk management. That notion of that cone of uncertainty and how much can we deflate that cone of uncertainty, and at T0 when we have to get that report written, what is our uncertainty still? And I think that the issue of transparency is exactly that. Here's what I don't know. Here's what I know. Here's what I don't know. And that's the two sides of this report that has to be written at that particular point in time and then handed over. And my plan was always, and again, this is well written down plans. These are the things we need to have in incident management, but and come out in the tabletop exercise. So practice how this works out. You obviously can't figure out your exact cone of uncertainty for every single incident, but you can practice how you would do the mechanics of releasing this information. So my idea was always, here's the things I can say, because here's the things that I know. And part of that is being open and honest, because we've already known what happens with CISOs when they don't necessarily tell the truth or don't have all the information. So transparent and release out. And then the next step is there's going to be another update in XX hours, right? I hope to know more because my teams are working on these particular things, and I hope to know more at this particular point in time. And I think that's what we have to do. We have to do that. And again, I'm going to draw it back to go do your tabletop exercises, get yourself a written plan to figure out how to do this, work with legal, work with whatever departments you need to work with to get all this built out and get that information and reduce that cone of uncertainty as quickly as you can.
Okay, and I do see there's a question from the audience here, and I'm going to take that. Thank you. If you do have questions in the chat, we still are on for a few more minutes, so please do drop your questions on YouTube or LinkedIn, and we will take them live. The question is how automation could support the draft CISA reporting requirements.
In my experience, automation to be able to reduce that cone of uncertainty, we have to do some of that. If you're dispatching teams to go and look at the logs for this particular subsystem and this particular subsystem and this particular subsystem, and they're scattered amongst a dozen different repositories and have to do it's a coordination nightmare. And so automating that and getting further in that, do I have a magic bullet on that one? No, I definitely do not have a magic bullet, but I know that I have to be able to gather as much information as I can in a short amount of time frame and have it be represented truly.
Okay. And then you'd also, if you think about it, we're going to have to report that out, as you said, to the CISA under the reporting requirements. You have to reduce that cone of uncertainty. But I think this is going to change how some organizations have been sharing information in the past about cybersecurity incidents. So, any suggestions for how companies can effectively do a correct disclosure, but also maintain the confidentiality and protect any sensitive information when they're required to report these factors to CISA?
Tough question. Do I have a magic bullet on that one either? No. My best recommendation is kind of what I already said. Practice some of this stuff. Bring in your legal department. Make sure that you work well with that legal department and talk about the risks. It's a good idea to have yourself a data inventory. Another story that I kind of draw myself back to is one of the fitness tracker devices. Don't remember which one. Released a bunch of information in the effort of transparency, and sure enough, they leaked where I believe it was a CIA base was somewhere in the Middle East.
Yeah, people were out on their morning jogs
Yeah,
in a
you
place
could
where there
clearly
should not
see the
be
running track
anything. Yeah, you
that
could
went
see the
around the
perimeter.
base. Yeah. These sorts of things, and you understand. I mean, I think about that. Because I think about that one a fair bit. I think that's one where they were honestly trying to be open and transparent and talk about how these things work, but it turns out that information is really important. So what's our antidote to that? Well, one of them is to think about what data we have in what repositories and what the sensitivity of that is, and how we can make sure that, in this case, the personal data was blinded, right? We don't know who was jogging around that track, but yet the data was out there. And so thinking about that from a privacy and data impact assessment. Maybe I coined that term brand new, but it's usually a privacy impact assessment. But data impact assessment of what data we have, how and when we can release it. We should definitely have that notion for when we're going through our logs and releasing information. No magic bullet, but thinking about that ahead of time in your tabletop exercises. Yeah.
Yeah, and be friends with counsel, I think, more than anything
Be
else.
friends
That's
with
the other
counsel.
thing,
Yep.
because they're the people who are going to ultimately be writing it, and you want to advise them on what to write. You just don't want them to write it all on their own, because, as we've said, that can also produce some not so great outcomes.
Yes. Yep.
Well, with that, I want to thank you for being on the show today, Jeff. If you're
Yeah.
watching this and you know somebody who should be on the show, or hey, if you're that person, you're like, hey, you know what? I should be on that show. Drop a note in the comments or just DM me on LinkedIn. And with that, Jeff, I really want to thank you again for joining us today. And I want to thank our audience again for tuning into today's live stream. Thanks.
Thank you, Kayne. It's a lot of fun.